3 weeks ago, I released the Opening Up Nationals Plan to tackle COVID, end lockdowns and reopen to the world. I called on the government to urgently speed up the vaccine rollout and to invest in the tools and technologies that will allow us to safely reconnect to the world, to set milestones for vaccinations and lay out a detailed plan to reopen our border, to get Kiwis home in time for Christmas. The government has continued its approach of making vague announcements and promising more detail in the future, but things are moving far too slowly. There is a stunning lack of urgency from this government to say what needs to be done and getting that done. To end this lockdown, which has dragged on for more than 2 months, to get us through to the other side of this pandemic and to provide New Zealand with a plan. We need a plan because we now have more than 350,000 New Zealanders dependent on a benefit. That's about 1 in every 9 of the working age population. And for context, that's enough Kiwis to fill Eden Park 7 times over. Our national debt is set to double. Inflation is the highest it has been in 25 years. Business failures have spiked and many more are at risk. Māori and Pacifica unemployment was at 7.8% even before the current lockdown, and the underutilisation rate for women was already 13%. Our economy performed well during the first lockdown, but we cannot afford the current level of complacency, and New Zealanders need action. National will continue to push the government to do what's needed, to take action in the interests of New Zealanders, to invest their hard-earned taxes wisely, to only borrow what's necessary and to invest it in areas that will pay off, to make it easier to do business and to employ others, not harder, to trust and empower our entrepreneurs, our farmers and our small business owners. And that's why today I'm proud to be launching Back in Business, National's plan to save livelihoods and unleash our economy. This is the next step in New Zealand's COVID response. And I'd like to extend my thanks to the wonderful team of MPs and their hard-working staff for helping to put this plan together. And I particularly want to thank Andrew Bailey and the Honourable Michael Woodhouse for their leadership in this area. Back in Business is what a national government under my leadership would be implementing right now. It lays out a comprehensive package of urgent actions that I am calling on the government to adopt today. Our plan provides immediate support to ensure businesses that have had to suffer through more than 21 weeks of lockdown over the last 18 months are able to survive for the next 12 months. It also sets out a clear pathway to move beyond lockdowns, internal borders and alert level rules that no longer make sense. Immediate support is vital, particularly for small businesses suffering through lockdown. If we want these otherwise viable businesses to survive and still be around as we move through lockdown restrictions and reopen to the world, we need to help them get through these next few months. These businesses have helped to keep us all safe by following the lockdown rules, even where they haven't always made sense. It's only right that we compensate them fairly. Spending to support these businesses today will pay off for the economy tomorrow. But beyond that, the best thing we can do is to help businesses survive the next 12 months, is to reduce the need for support in the first place. That means doing whatever it takes to avoid lockdown. It means shifting to a smarter, more targeted approach to managing the risks of Covid-19. And just as vaccination allows us to shift from blanket restrictions to individuals managing their own risks, the shift from elimination to vigorous suppression will allow the government to start trusting and enabling businesses to manage their own COVID risks. Businesses don't want to rely on the government, they just want the freedom to get on with the job. And it's time actually that this government backed businesses to do exactly that. And that's why I'm calling on the government to commit to ending lockdowns, reopening our economy and reconnecting to the world when we hit National's vaccination milestone of 85%, 85 to 90%, or on the 1st of December, whichever comes earlier. Just get on with the job. The time for equivocation is over. We need milestones, we need dates, we need certainty. New Zealand needs a plan, and National has that plan. I urge the government to adopt it. Thank you. I'll now ask Andrew Bailey to speak to you.
Good morning, everyone, and nice to be here with you. So National's plan is focused on what the government should be implementing immediately, given the unwelcome return of COVID into our communities. Some businesses, particularly those in the export industry or economy, have been able to do well despite COVID, and we hope that that's going to continue. But many others have been decimated by the multiple lockdowns and alert level changes, exacerbated by rules and restrictions that no longer seem to make sense. Reopening the economy to allow businesses to trade is the best way to ensure their survival. National believes that the government's priority in the short term should be to protect viable businesses from closing while providing a clear pathway to reopening the economy and our borders. We also need smarter rules for our public health measures. It makes no sense right now that South Island is in level 2 or that vaccinated workers can't cross regional lockdown borders. Our plan contains a lot of detail, which I invite you to delve into. But I'd just like to highlight a few areas that we think are key. The first one is around cash. The need for cash for businesses to get through the lockdowns. Cash is the lifeblood of any business. And while the supports such as wage subsidy and resurgence payments have helped, they are no longer appropriate or adequate. These programs were designed quickly with short, sharp lockdowns in mind. They were never intended for keeping businesses going through extended lockdowns like the one we're seeing in Auckland, which is now in its 9th week and counting. National would improve wage support for hard-pressed businesses entering their 9th week of lockdown. We will implement a rental support package that gives cash to businesses, and we will extend the lockdown payments during Delta Level 2. The second element of our package includes the short-term tax relief and incentives to invest. Our back-in-business plan includes a new, lower tax rate for small businesses over the next 2 years. It also includes an increase in the amount Kiwi workers can earn before a higher tax rate kicks in, and incentives to encourage businesses to invest in new plant and equipment and related software. These and other measures in our plan will ease the burden on business, boost growth, and ensure spending flows through to the parts of the economy where it is needed the most. The third element of our plan is about targeted support for the most affected by COVID. COVID has had a disproportionate impact on a number of sectors, and especially hospitality, tourism, accommodation, and the event sectors. Many businesses in these areas are already having to be forced or have been forced to close. Now there's light at the end of the COVID tunnel. We need to make sure we retain as many of these otherwise viable businesses as possible. Our plan includes targeted support to help businesses in these sectors to survive. For example, our dine and destination vouchers would give every adult who is doubly vaccinated a total of $100 to be redeemed at any business in these sectors over the next 6 months. We're also proposing to support the event sector by underwriting an events insurance scheme. We're also calling for much more support in the area of mental health. Many of our small business owners and their staff are tremendously affected by what's going on at the moment. They're under immense pressure, but they're often overlooked. That needs to change with the program that we are proposing. In conclusion, these are just some of the measures we are proposing, but together they add up to a substantial plan to get us through the next 12 months and ensure our economy thrives as we reopen to the world. But more important than the specific measures that I've outlined, I think, is the shift in approach that the government needs to adopt. It needs to move on from the 2020 approach of blanket lockdowns and strict restrictions, with only limited exemptions. Now, as we approach the National's vaccination target of 85 to 90%, the government needs to start to take a step back, trust businesses and their staff to play a bigger role in managing our COVID risk. They also need to offer certainty about the rules for vaccination in the workplace. They need to give people a clear timeline for when they can resume business travel. They need to provide dates, milestones and details. They need to lay out a plan. Or better yet, they need to adopt National's Back in Business plan. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'll keep my comments brief, as I know you'll have questions, and frankly, there's only so long one can go on about fiscal policy without your eyes glazing over. But it is an important topic, so just indulge me for a moment while I touch briefly on some big areas where the government needs to do much, much better. The first is in spending discipline. Under our plan, spending will be lower and more focused. We need to be relentlessly focused on responding to COVID, on keeping people connected with their jobs and ensuring businesses survive, not pouring billions of dollars into all manner of unrelated areas. This government has cynically used the cover of COVID as a bottomless ATM with which to advance its political agenda. At least $12 billion from the COVID fund has gone on things that by any measure can't be considered a response to COVID. Things like 3 waters, green schools, cameras on fishing boats. And in addition to dipping into the COVID fund, the government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars restructuring the entire health system in the middle of a pandemic. They're even continuing to spend money on design work for a cycle bridge they've already cancelled. The waste simply has to stop. The second area is in debt. Our national debt has grown by $42 billion in the last 18 months. We're borrowing on average $70 million a day and are projected to run deficits for the next 5 years. That will result in debt of more than $100,000 for every Kiwi family. Last year we had to borrow to avoid the worst predictions about what COVID might do to our economy. But that doesn't mean today, just because things aren't as bad as earlier feared, that everything is rosy. If you're in debt, but in less debt than your gloomiest predictions, that doesn't create fiscal headroom, as the Minister of Finance and even some economic commentators have described it. It shouldn't be a licence for the government to spend even more. It behoves the government to reduce the debt burden on future generations. National understands how important that is. This government doesn't. And finally, I need to address the huge elephant in the room, and that's inflation. Annual inflation has just hit 4.9%, and prices are rising faster than they have ever been in the last 25 years. Now, that's no surprise to Kiwi families. who have seen their groceries, their petrol, their housing costs and the costs of many other essentials rising rapidly. Families are struggling. And government policies are contributing to that inflation. Labor have increased the size of government spending by 40% in just 4 years, and they've wasted billions on unproductive spending. They've pushed cheap money into the economy, and any Year 10 economics student knows that that will drive up inflation. And inflation erodes purchasing power. It hurts savers and it adds financial strain to every New Zealander with a mortgage. It's now the biggest medium-term threat to the New Zealand economy, and the government must recognise this, halt its wasteful spending and focus on what's necessary, like the proposals in National's plan. We all recognise that COVID has changed a lot, and no one is calling for austerity or cuts to essential public services like health and education. But we simply cannot allow government to use COVID as an excuse to spend us into financial ruin. We know exactly where that leads. More debt, more inflation, higher taxes, and ultimately lower living standards. If the government is serious about helping New Zealand recover from COVID, they need to put away the credit card, focus on responding to COVID, and recommit to fiscal responsibility. And this time, they need to mean it.